What's up everybody, Natalie here, and today I'm going to review Earthling Ed's new book, How to Argue with a Meat Eater and Win Every Time. We're going to decide if this book was worth it, both in terms of cost, about $16, and in terms of time. It took me about 4.5 to 5 hours to read this book. I read the entire thing today. Now, if you don't know who I am, I've been debating people about veganism for the better part of 3 years, so when it comes to arguments against veganism, I feel as if I've heard them all. I also feel as if I know how to debunk pretty much all of them, so I wanted to see if there was anything new in this book that I hadn't learned or that surprised me, and yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later, but first I want to touch on why Earthling Ed is so important and why I think we should listen to him in the first place. I saw a poll on Our Vegan last week that asked who was the most influential activist to yourself going vegan. There were 5 choices, 400 votes, and over half the votes were for Earthling Ed. Now, I was one of those votes because I don't think I'd be vegan if it weren't for Earthling Ed. Now, a lot of vegan activists also went vegan because of Earthling Ed, but most of them did so because of his videos and seeing his debates. For me personally, it was because of his first ebook, 30 Non-Vegan Excuses and How to Respond to Them. So his new book, How to Argue with a Meat Eater, is sort of an extension of that ebook. It covers a lot more ground. He starts the book by talking about why people are closed off to veganism in the first place, different cognitive biases, maintaining the status quo, a lot of basic stuff that we generally know because most of us were not vegan initially, so we felt these forces. When we were first presented with veganism, we probably didn't want to go vegan and we put up psychological defenses. So Ed brings that up as a way to help us empathize with the meat eaters, to show that we shouldn't look down on them, we shouldn't be judgmental, and if we are being judgmental, we're going to end up less persuasive. So it's better to just acknowledge that there are unseen forces and people aren't horrible people for eating animals. They've been so brainwashed and so conditioned, and that's why they're having this negative reaction to veganism. Next, Ed goes into effective communication and how you should present yourself as a vegan activist. He says that he knows that vegans have the stereotype of being very militant and judgmental, so he tries to go against that as much as he possibly can. Now, he gives a lot of great communication tips, from open body language to showing your palms to mirroring other people to repeating back what people say to them and more. Basic stuff. If you've ever seen Charisma on Command on YouTube or ever taken a public speaking course, then you probably know a lot of this stuff already. He says that we should use the Socratic method and ask people questions to help them figure out why they believe the things that they do. Obviously, this has been really effective for me. You know, there's really no reason to have a conversation about veganism with someone if you're not asking them questions. If you just tell people what to do, they're not going to like it. They are more receptive to things if they actually come up with it themselves. So vegan activism is kind of guiding them toward the moral conclusion that harming animals unnecessarily is wrong, which is something that most people agree with already. Ed says that his idea of winning a conversation isn't turning that other person vegan on the spot, because that's probably not going to happen. It's to leave them with a greater understanding and a more favorable view of veganism. Now, when it comes to my personal favorite communication techniques, a couple things that I think are great that Ed didn't touch on are to shake someone's hand when you meet them and to introduce yourself with a smile. Also, when you're sitting across from someone, it comes across as more combative, so try to sit side by side, then it makes you feel as if you're on the same team as someone. That's something that Ed does in debates, but I don't know if he realizes that that is effective. So this communication section of the book was fairly short, and then he spends the rest of the book on the arguments against veganism. Instead of listing the arguments one by one, Ed breaks them up into archetypes, which I thought was a really cool way to organize the book. Some examples of archetypes are the mistaken philosopher, the well-intentioned leftist, and the animal farmer. For example, the mistaken philosopher would use arguments like morality is subjective, and what if we give the animals a good life, then isn't it a net positive for them? Obviously, I'm not going to go through all the arguments one by one. That would be a really long video, but if you've read his other books and watched a lot of his debates, you've probably heard him talk about these arguments before. He spends anywhere from 1 to 4 pages per argument, and I would guess there are probably at least 100 arguments in this book, so it's definitely much longer than his free ebook. And while he does debunk all of them, he doesn't go too in depth on any of them. I do want to quickly cover some of his arguments that stood out to me. The first was his section on insects and insect protein. I thought it was really interesting because I actually haven't heard too many people talk about insect protein from a vegan perspective. You know, you hear about it here and there, but actually seeing the environmental cost of it and examining insect sentience levels was really fascinating. That was one of the highlights of this book for me. He also uses that insect protein as a way to segue into bees. Now, we've all heard Piers Morgan yell about bees. It seems like vegans are always talking about bees these days. So he talks about how certain plant farming is harmful to bees and the arguments against it, and how a lot of it's driven by the honey industry and other problems with honey. And he covered a lot of ground. I thought it was a really useful section of the book, so I would definitely recommend checking that out. Another section I really enjoyed was on crop deaths. Now, crop deaths is a really hot anti-vegan argument right now. It seems like every single short video I post on Instagram or YouTube, the most common comment I get is, but vegans are killing small animals though. And it's funny because people word it in like the exact same way as Ted Nugent or that guy from Yellowstone. These arguments are just like in the world psyche right now, and it's really annoying. Someone told me today, what about your fields of tofu? It's like, do they think that tofu grows in fields? It's absolutely insane. So the way that Ed went through this argument, he didn't just say, oh, here's how to debunk it. He actually showed where it came from, how it evolved, and how you can debunk it after that. So yeah, it kind of goes through some of the history of these arguments, which I think is one of the book's greatest strengths, because obviously we can just debunk these here and there, but if we know where people are getting these arguments in the first place, it just makes us more effective communicators. And if someone says like, oh, crop dust, I can say, oh, you're basing that on this from 2003, this from 2011. It just makes you sound a lot more knowledgeable. So I find it very useful that Ed took the time to go through and cite all those sources so that we have them as a resource we can lean on anytime. Now, I'm not going to go into too many other arguments here because I want to get into my critique. I think this book is a solid base for vegan argumentation. However, it didn't quite live up to my expectations. I think my expectations are unfairly high just because I have that background of being turned vegan by Earthling Ed's first ebook. I was kind of hoping for a longer version of that, and the reason that I think that ebook is better than this book is because it tells you exactly what to say. So if someone says animal farming is okay because we breed them for that purpose, and how to argue with meat eaters, Ed would just kind of debunk that argument, but in his free ebook, he would say, ask them this. Is it okay to breed dogs for dogfighting, or is dogfighting okay because the animals are bred for these purpose? And then he gives a few other examples of exactly what you can ask. I found that to be so useful. So How to Argue with Meat Eaters feels more like a book for vegans, whereas 39 Vegan Excuses and How to Respond to Them feels more like a book for activists. Obviously, I'm a vegan, but I identify more with being an activist. So the former book was a lot more useful to me personally. I also feel like there are a lot of books similar to this one. How to Argue with Vegans by Benny Malone covers pretty much all these same arguments that Ed does, but he does it in a way with more of an emphasis on psychology, and I just found that book to be a bit more compelling than Ed's. There are other books similar to this written by Seb Alex, one written by Lifting Vegan Logic, so I just feel as if, since Ed's kind of the best at vegan debates, I was expecting this to be the best book on this topic, and I feel like, unfortunately, it wasn't, which is kind of a bummer for me. Even though it was good, it just wasn't quite groundbreaking. There wasn't anything super original in it. There was some really great info, and obviously a lot of this is coming from my specific curse of knowledge, right? Because I've been talking to people about veganism for 3 years. I knew most of this stuff already, and I learned most of it from Ed, just like not in this book specifically. So I think I was just kind of expecting to really level up some of my communication, some of my argumentation skills, and I don't know if that's been the case. That being said, maybe I'll do outreach this week. I'm definitely doing outreach this week, but maybe I'll be way better because of this book. I haven't tested it out yet, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So is this book worth it for me personally? Maybe, I think probably, because like, yeah, $16 is kind of a lot, but like what else would I spend that on, right? Like beans. I think anytime I'm investing in my education and my knowledge and spreading that knowledge is a good investment, even if maybe it's a little more than I would like to spend. Like I said, this book was a really quick read. I literally read the entire thing today, so it wasn't a huge time investment, and it has a really easy table of contents. You can search for things, so if I do ever have an argument that I want to debunk and kind of see where sources come from about it, it's going to be a great resource for me there. I would have preferred if this book had spent more time going into fewer arguments, like if each argument had 10 pages dedicated to it and there were only 20 or so arguments. I think that would have been better than trying to cover so many of them but only do it in a few pages. In terms of places you could get this content for free, the Carnism Debunked website is really good. Vegancheatsheet.org has most of these arguments anyway, so I feel like this information is almost readily available online, so you don't necessarily have to spend the money for this book. That being said, support Earthling Ed. I'm sure the money goes to a good cause. He's got his sanctuary, he's got his advocacy, so it's not like I feel like I wasted my money or anything. And I think if you're a new vegan or you haven't debated people much or you haven't read his other books, then this would be an amazing resource for you. But when it comes to when I meet vegans in the future, they ask me, oh, I want to get into activism, what do I do? I'm going to continue to recommend his free ebook because I feel like it's just a bit more practical and just the tips are a little crunchier. I think it's more likely that people are going to read a free ebook than a 300-page book that they have to pay for. If you're really interested in this topic, I think you should absolutely buy this book. If you really like Earthling Ed, buy this book. But if you are a seasoned activist, I don't know if you're going to find that much value within these pages that you could not find elsewhere. So that's my review. I think it was a solid read, but nothing groundbreaking. I still love Earthling Ed. I'm still a total fangirl. But like I said, I think his free ebook is a little bit better than this one. So let me know down below if you've read this, if you're gonna buy it, what you thought of my review, if you're doing activism this weekend. Special thanks to my patrons. I really appreciate you guys, and I will see you next Friday.